Welcome to a new episode of NBRI, New Business and Retail Insights from the Center for Retailing Studies, Mays Business School, Texas A&M University. I'm your host, Venki Shankar, Director of Research and Coleman Chair, Professor of Marketing. It's my distinct pleasure to welcome our guest today, Dr. Bernd Skiera, Chair and Professor of Electronic Commerce at the Goethe University, Frankfurt, Germany. He's a member of the Managing Board of the EFL, the Data Institute out there, as well as the Schmallenbach Society and Germany's representative at the European Marketing Community, or EMAC. Bernd's research interests include MarTech, sales tech, e-commerce, online marketing, marketing analytics, consumer privacy, and value-based customer management. Bernd is ranked among the top 30 scientists worldwide based on publication in the American Marketing Association AMA journals, such as Journal of Marketing and Journal of Marketing Research. Bernd did his dissertation in habitation at the University of Kiel. Prior to becoming an academic, Bernd also served as a software developer at SAP. Guten Tag, Bernd. Thank you for joining me in this conversation today. Wie geht's?
Mir geht es sehr gut, Venki. Machen wir das Interview auf Deutsch?
Sehr gut. Ich verstehe keine Deutsch, aber ich spreche gut nicht. So please put up with my limited German, but thank you for joining me today. How have you been in the last 1 year or so, ever since the outbreak of COVID?
I mean, none of us is actually very happy about COVID, but what I enjoyed is that we had to move towards digitization in the teaching area. So finally, I managed to come up with all the videos from my classes, and I'm actually quite surprised how well it is perceived, how much I enjoy it. So I'm pretty sure, I mean, hopefully the COVID will be over quite soon, but I'm pretty sure that the world we will encounter after the COVID will be substantially different from the world before COVID. And so in that sense, despite all the disadvantages of the virus, I think it also has a lot of advantages for the research and the teaching in particular.
I'm glad you see a positive in the post-COVID era. I introduce you in the traditional way, but I'd like you to describe yourself in maybe 5 words or less. What really makes Bernd Skiera tick?
Well, I think I'm an early bird. So what I really enjoy, I don't have to set up the alarm clock, but I'm one of those persons, if they didn't get much done until lunchtime, they're really nervous. So I usually get up early in the morning. I enjoy having a cup of coffee and then starting to work. And I also think I'm fairly passionate about what I do. I love my job being a professor in business. I really love working together with doctoral students. It gives me exposure to really bright people who challenge me. And hopefully I can also help them developing a good academic career. As a researcher, as both of us knows, not always the research is perceived by everyone as being as excited as we think. So we have to be persistent. We have to work on improving the research. And if you look at my research that I do, it's usually empirical work. So I really try to put together interesting data sets, look at new problems, and then hopefully come up with a very good solution.
That describes you very well from what I know you also. And tell us a little bit about your research journey. I know you moved from software development into academia, and then you started your journey at University of Kiel. Walk us through some of the key aspects of your research journey so far.
Well, I certainly enjoyed working for SAP from 85 to 88. That was just the time before they went public. I was among the first 200 employees, but that was certainly a really exciting time. That was kind of a startup feeling when I was very young. And then I decided to go for a PhD or doctoral degree, and I was certainly very influenced by my doctoral supervisor, Sönke Albers, who had the idea that he wanted to outline the monetary impact of a marketing decision. And that's certainly something I try to pursue. So the very basic idea is you want to make a decision, and obviously that decision involves cost or requires some budget, but you want to make sure that the return is larger than the amount of money you invested. So what we need to have a model that allows us to predict how much money we can make with a particular decision. So if you look at my dissertation, it was about sales territory alignment. And the vision that I pursued there was essentially I had a mapping program, so that fitted quite nicely with my experience as a software engineer. And what you could do on the map, you could realign the territories. And the idea was that we come up with a prediction about how much money we can make with a certain territory alignment. And the economic intuition behind was that if you have one very large territory and one very small one, then obviously in the one large territory, you are not paying enough attention to rather attractive clients. Whereas in the small territory, you visit clients where actually you feel they are not really attractive enough. And so by realigning the territories, I try to solve the allocation problem in terms of how much calls can I make to which kind of customers. And that allocation problem combined with the assignment problem, that allowed me to predict how much money I can make with a certain territory alignment. And of course, once you know how much money you can make with one territory alignment, you can develop an algorithm that tries to look out for what is the most profitable combination of sales territories. And so you can see I have a decision in that sense. It was the territory alignment, and I could align it to a monetary outcome. And since then, I usually pursued ideas. So for example, I like conjoint analysis a lot because you can simulate markets, you can make pricing or product decisions, and you can see how much money is involved with such a decision. So that's certainly something that really keeps me ongoing. And this is the kind of vision. And of course, nowadays we have different data sets. We have new algorithms. As you know, we have exciting developments in the area of machine learning. But still, I feel we as researchers in business and also managers in business, we should try to make sure we also get the knowledge in terms of how to make sure that we can also measure the monetary impact of our decisions.
That is a very good description of your focus, but I presume that also led you to marketing finance interface, where you started still looking at the return on marketing efforts. And now I understand you're working on MarTech or sales tech. These are marketing technology and sales technology solutions. And in particular, I understand that you're working at a concept called iPaaS. Which stands for Integration Platform as a Service. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, the core idea behind iPaaS, and it's a broad concept, and I've been quite fortunate that I can collaborate with a company I founded a couple of years ago. And essentially, if you look at marketing systems, you usually have lots of different systems. So there are some research, some reports going on. They showed we might have had about 150 marketing systems, let's say 7-8 years ago. Nowadays, we are up to 7,000. And of course, there are large players out there like SAP, Salesforce, Adobe, and others. They try to come up with integrated solutions. But of course, I mean, the development is so fast. So if we both of us look at our kids, they're constantly using new system, a new software which don't know. And for example, if you look at something simple, like you want to promote a webinar, actually this process is very likely going to touch multiple systems. So first of all, you have a webinar system, for example, GoToMeeting, but there are lots of alternatives out there. And what you want to do is, of course, you plan the webinar itself. So you need to have someone from the organization who's an expert in the field saying, okay, I'm going to run a webinar on topic X. But of course, I mean, that's not enough. What you need to make sure is you need to promote the webinar, because otherwise you have no attendees. So you already have the combination between, let's say, an email marketing system or some kind of marketing automation system, and you have to combine it with the webinar system. And once the webinar is done, you also want to follow up. You might want to tell your sales force, oh, those customers were interested in our system. And by the way, this customer watched the entire webinar to the end. So it looks like he or she's really interested. And this other customer, he or she briefly joined, but then left, or maybe just watched half of the webinar. So you feel maybe this customer is not ready for a sales call, but maybe we should shoot him an email, sending him the slides or providing him with additional information. So if you look at it, you have at least an email marketing system, you have the webinar system, you have, let's say, a CRM system, and maybe other systems, and you build up a process across all those different systems. Now the question is, how does the data move from the email marketing to the webinar system? That might be done via registration of the customers, but how does it move from the webinar system to the CRM system? And if you do an action in the CRM system, how does that go back to the email marketing system? Because you might want to start something like a lead nurturing process where you say, okay, maybe that customer is not ready for a sales call, but I want to provide him or her over the next 10 weeks with additional information. So you constantly have to exchange information, data between those systems, and actually it's a huge problem. And so what the iPaaS does, the core idea is that you can link cloud-based systems, but also systems on premises, and you can synchronize data between those systems. So the idea is not to build up a very large database where you put in all the data and you have all the effort in terms of administering the data. The idea is you have all the systems, you keep every system with its data, and doing so, it's obviously redundant. So you have the same information in multiple systems, but the redundancy requires that you have to synchronize all the updates.
The system.
So loosely saying, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going to summarize your system as kind of a end-to-end lead generation, lead qualification, and a CRM overall system, but that consists of multiple systems talking to each other and performing flawlessly and very smoothly. Is that
That's right? That's right.
Yeah. So
that's right.
What are some of the research issues or challenging issues in here for a marketing standpoint?
Well, I think very importantly is, from my point of view, we have to look in marketing much more at the duration that certain processes take. So that usually requires event data. And event data, I mean, essentially contains three information. The one is an ID about, let's say, for example, a customer. The second one is a timestamp. And the third one is a particular action. Let's say you come to my website on a particular day at a particular hour, you do something, and now the next event might be me as a salesperson, I call you. So for example, if you would like to figure out, does it make sense that I call you quickly? Then of course I need to measure when did you get in contact with me and how long did it take me to respond? And my experience is that quite often we essentially lack the information about how much time something takes because we don't have the timestamp in our data. So personally, I feel the big future will be that we are getting much better at analyzing those type of event data.
That's a very nice way of saying we should completely leverage the granular data we get. And some of the examples, Bernd, you talked about are mostly B2B. So is it only for B2B, or do you think iPaaS could also be used for B2C also?
I think it's relevant for both areas. The difference between B2B and B2C is essentially the following. Usually in a B2B setting, you still have salesperson involved. Whereas in the B2C setting, let's say if you look at Amazon or other online retailers, essentially everything is done on the retailer system, on the retailer's platform. So you don't have the integration problem with the sales force. But in a B2B setting, I think the fundamental change is that previously, you could go to an exhibition and essentially the customer would show up because they are not well informed, let's say 10 years ago. In today's world, you have all the information available on the internet. So the customer is much better informed. So instead of contacting 5 potential suppliers, they just contact 2. And the trick is you have to make sure you are one of the 2.
Right. And that brings us to the idea that in a post-COVID world, more and more customers are increasingly going to rely on this rather than trade shows, which are now becoming not feasible. So I think iPaaS, do you think it's going to get fast acceptance and it's going to become the norm, at least in B2B situations?
I mean, essentially, you face the question: how can you operate with different systems? One solution might be you try to avoid to having multiple systems, but that requires that first of all you rely on one large supplier. Probably it's very costly, and you have to make sure this large supplier is following up with all the new trends coming up. That might be feasible, but probably it's a challenge. The other philosophy is that you simply use something like a best of breed. You combine them and you have a flexible system where you could also drop one system, replace it by another system, but still the process you have is still working out fine. So that's, I mean, there are two fundamental ideas. Obviously, we're very much in favor of the best of breed approach.
That's good to know. But that brings us to the issue of privacy, right? Because now you're going to capture so much data. You talked about timestamp data, knowing when a prospect looked at a webinar or did a query or search. And but how does the privacy aspect play in here, especially in a place like Germany, where it's very sensitive to privacy elements, the whole of Europe for that matter? Tell us something about these issues and speak to your research. I believe you're doing some work on this. So give me a summary of what your thoughts are on this and what your research is.
Yeah, I mean, two answers. The first one, as a technology provider, of course, I mean, privacy is very important. If you allow for synchronizing data, one way to approach it that you essentially never touch the data yourself. So that means essentially it remains still within the firm, but you're not touching it, so you don't have the privacy problem as a technology provider. But that's of course something very important. The current problem that, I don't want to say problem, but I mean essentially what happened, and I think Europe is in the forefront of reacting, is that the regulator feels something has gone wrong in terms of how companies use the data. And I would say to some extent that's probably right. I mean, if you look at the Cambridge Analytica scandal, it kind of made clear that it was probably too easy for companies to get access to consumer data. So what we do right now in Europe with the GDPR, and I think California and many other countries are following, but probably in Europe we have the strictest law. Essentially, the law says if you don't have consent from the consumer, you're not allowed to collect the data. Sorry, personal data. And personal data, we could look at a precise definition, but it's rather broadly defined. So for example, even collecting cookies, digital cookies about you, which wouldn't include your name, address, or something like that would be considered personal data. And of course, I need those cookies in an online advertising system, for example, for retargeting or for affiliate marketing to work. So the challenge is now that you as an affiliate marketing provider or you as an ad exchange, you need to make sure you get the consent from the consumer. But unfortunately, you as the ad exchange, you don't have contact to the end consumer. The one who has contact might be the publisher. For example, the New York Times or a German newspaper or someone else. So that puts the publisher into the responsibility of not only getting consent for him or herself, but also for all the other actors with whom they collaborate. If you look at how many actors they collaborate with, you easily end up in the area of several hundred actors. And you have the obligation as a publisher to make sure
to be responsible,
that you're responsible. So that's, let's say, the downside, but at the same time, it also increases your power because you are essentially the bottleneck who can get the consent for all the other actors behind. And I mean, that's a fascinating area. To give you an example, I mean, probably you know the cookie consent banners. At least if you get to a European website, they have to ask you whether they have the consent from you to store the cookies. The consent rate can vary anywhere between 10% and 90%. So that's a huge range. And of course, it depends upon the design, it depends upon the text that you use. But let's say if you end up with 10% and you have a technology provider such as Google who might say, if you don't have the consent, we don't deliver you with the opportunities to serve ads, that essentially means you are no longer able to make business with Google and to refinance the content that you probably provide currently at a price that doesn't justify the cost. And that, of course, is a huge challenge. So, I mean, in Europe, the publishers currently have to deal with this problem about how to get the consent. And it's a fascinating area because it moves from consumer behavior, how to get consent, to a backend system where you also have to manage all the consent. So for example, if you come to me as a publisher and you tell me, oh, I provided you with consent, but now I would like to withdraw it, it means I have to essentially delete your data, but also the 100 other actors with whom I provided the data, I have to tell them, please, you have to delete all the data for the cookie that belongs to, for example, Venkishenko.
Yeah, but tell me a little bit about, I think GDPR came about a couple of years ago. So what has been the effect so far? You know, you posed this big challenge for especially all the players involved. But what has been the effect? Has it been a mixed bag, or has it been in general heading in the right direction? What are you finding based on your research?
That's very difficult to say. I think originally Europe had the idea of, in particular, publishing the super large online ad companies such as Google and Facebook and others. Um, I mean, those players essentially were able to really prepare extremely well for this event, and they also have the resources, the financial resources to deal with the problem. What is a little bit less clear, whether all the other players that are not as rich, whether they really have the funding to make sure they prepare accordingly. And I think the crucial moment is also out there whether, I mean, we will end up with a world I would describe as a paid content world. I think right now we can roughly describe the internet as a medium where we get a lot of content free of charge. Free of charge meaning we don't have to pay for it by money, but we have to pay for it by providing attention to ads, and of course also dividing information about ourselves. And I mean, it's a very fair question whether this is a better world than a paid content world, where we might essentially have the opportunity, for example, not seeing ads and not providing information, for example, for paying $5 a month for a particular newspaper. That might be a better world for the two of us because we could easily afford to pay the $5 fee for a newspaper. But for many others, it might be actually a worse world because they will not be able they won't have the funding to pay the $5. So I think we are currently on the edge where the publishers are going to recognize it's getting more and more difficult to keep up the advertising revenue, for example, because consent rate dropped. And where they have to think about, okay, how can we still continue to finance the content?
That is a good way of describing what the issues are currently. You primarily talking from publisher standpoint, but you know, the world that you describe is you know, many marketers face this freemium problem. They always divide the audience into two types: one who wants to get free benefits, so they are willing to tolerate ads; the other ones are, you know, paid subscribers, so for them they will at least, if not completely remove the ads, make it very less ad dependent. But where do you see this play out in terms of in the long run? Because is this sustainable for a lot of marketers to keep doing this? Are we going into, because we are going more and more into subscription models? For example, retailers are more and more digitally native retailers are going on subscription models, right? So we got Stitch Fix, all these kind of companies are consistently using that business model to survive. So do you think the business model evolves in such a way that it gets around these kind of privacy issues in a way that it makes a long-term viability of the business feasible?
Well, I think there's clearly a way, currently a movement towards a subscription-based business model, and probably most news publisher would like to achieve it. The question is how to get there. And for example, we currently have a project going on ad blocking, and what we find that actually, if you install an ad blocker, you're going to read more news. And it looks like it's a causal effect, so we control for all kind of endogeneity issues. Now the question is, what does it mean for the publisher? So on the one hand side, the publisher has advertising as the revenue model. On the other side, what we can clearly show by showing up ads, they are actually kind of forcing the consumer to use the product less intensively. So the question is what to do, given that as a news publisher, you would actually like the users to
Engagement, yeah.
read a lot of news. I mean, that's good news. So I mean, one clear recommendation that we have, if you enter a subscription model, as many news publishers try, you should very, very carefully trade off whether those subscription models, whether they still involve seeing ads or not. So our clear recommendation is that you should very, very carefully evaluate whether the additional revenue you get via advertising, whether that is justified by a lower usage, by a higher risk of churning, and maybe also by a higher likelihood of getting additional readers. Yep.
Thank you. Now, let's shift the gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the German environment with regard to retailing. I know Germany is a big player for retailing, and you have some of the best discounting chains like Aldi, Lidl, and Metro being some famous retail chains. How is the retailing situation in Germany? Is omni-channel going to be the future, or still brick and mortar is considered more valuable by the shoppers? Can you speak a little bit to the situation out there?
Well, I think for a stationary retailer, situation right now is extremely bad in Germany, as probably many other countries of the world. I mean, encountering a lockdown, if you don't have an online channel, it virtually means zero business. Right. So of course, I mean, the government, what they try to do, they try to kind of help you through that. I mean, obviously very, very difficult financial times. But I think the crucial question is, how will the world look like after the virus is gone? We all don't know when this will be happen, but very likely everyone whom we forced to move online during the last couple of months, I don't think that all of them will simply move back to the old world. It will be a different world, and they will have learned that actually the digital world provides a lot of advantages. So, I mean, apart from retailing, I don't believe that we will continue to move back to the office every single day a week. Probably we will have a hybrid model, at least where you have the flexibility, where we'll say, okay, why not sticking at home, doing some things done where you really need to concentrate, and then try to make sure you meet your team on 1, 2, maybe 3 days a week, and then you get all the teamwork done. And the other days you can work from home. And I'm also convinced with the retailers, I mean, they will move into such a direction. You mentioned Lidl, I mean, which is obviously a large discounter, but they are also fairly successful doing electronic commerce. So they build up an additional very successful online channel. Aldi is a bit slower, but also moving into that kind of direction.
So that resonates well with the experience of U.S. retailers, particularly in the grocery environment. All the U.S. retailers have benefited tremendously, starting from Amazon to Walmart to Target to Kroger's to H-E-B, and similar story you're telling. Now, looking to the future, what do you think are the key research issues, particularly with respect to your areas and also in the German market or in the European market?
Personally, I'm deeply convinced that in marketing, we have to, let's say, I would say most of the research we do is that looks at an individual decision. Let's say, figure out what the optimal price is, figure out what's the optimal promotion message, something like that. I think where the industry is currently moving to is towards whole processes. And that also requires to look at decisions more in a process. I give you an example. If you fill up your shopping basket online and you don't order, probably it's a good idea if I get your consent and if I have if I have an opportunity to contact you, I send you later on an email saying, oh, Wenke, I'm so sorry that you didn't purchase product X. Here's a coupon, whatever, 10%, and why don't you move forward? I would really love to have you as a customer. And if you purchase, it might also be a good idea to do it a second time, but probably not 3 times in a row, because then you learned, obviously, that you simply have to wait, you get a 10% coupon.
Yeah.
So that means, obviously, I need to have a process where I also have to consider, okay, what happened in the past and how can I consider that? Or another example, take the same process, but when to contact you. Should it be 24 hours later? Should it be at 8 a.m. in the morning? Should it be at the same point in time you did the purchase? Because obviously you had time doing the purchase there. And that also requires to track what is going on across time. And to some extent, I think exploring event data will turn out to be quite fruitful.
So that's a very good prediction, using better leveraging of event data for micro marketing or micro activities in the marketing process. So far, you've spoken eloquently about a lot of marketing issues. I'd like to understand you better as a person. What do you do for fun, Bernd?
Well, if I could do it, I would love to do skiing all winter long. So this winter probably will be a very bad winter for skiing, but I really love doing skiing. I also like all kind of outdoor activities. With my family, we spend a fair bit amount of time abroad. And when I was young, I used to play chess. That's obviously not the best sport to do with all the academic research, but sometimes I feel when I have to deal with the reviewers, I feel it's like a game of chess. And of course, I mean, I enjoyed watching the
You're pretty good
Netflix.
at that. You've been very successful in doing that, so I have to give you a lot of credit. So that's an interesting issue about chess. I understand that chess is now becoming more popular thanks to the Netflix documentary Queen's Gambit, and I know that you're probably a fan of that as well. So do you get some time to watch that series, or even keep in touch with some of your chess by online or playing with somebody real?
I mean, obviously, I watched the series. What I really enjoy doing is there's a very nice commentator on really all the good games currently going on. His name is Daniel King. He has a YouTube channel, powerplaychess.com. I really love watching his movies. They are 20 minutes long on average, and he's really brilliant in explaining what's going on. And that allows me also to keep up a little bit with what's currently going on.
Well, I appreciate that, because I myself used to be a chess player in my school and college days, having played for a number of levels. Unfortunately, like you, I don't have the time. The chess is very time consuming. But where do you think, since AI is now come up with better algorithms, you've got AI can beat the grandmaster, the best grandmaster very quickly now. Where do you think is the future of this for humans? Because the Go and chess games and all the games being mastered by AI, do you think there'll ever be a situation in which humans may be interested in pursuing this, because they might say, oh, no matter how hard we play, the machine will outwit us? So do you think this will lead to some kind of a resignation on the part of humans, that a lot of these tasks, I'm not going to apply my brains?
I actually don't think so. I mean, you talked about the AlphaZero, and the AlphaZero even put the level how good a machine can play chess and also go to a new level. But even way before AlphaZero, probably 10, 15 years ago, it was clear that a human cannot beat a machine. So, I mean, obviously the difference now became maybe a bit larger with the AlphaZero, but it didn't hurt the game. And what is quite interesting to see that actually the top players, they pick up the ideas from the machine. So it's not only the machines getting better,
Okay,
also the top players are picking up
they're
new
getting,
ideas.
okay.
Probably, I mean, the gap won't diminish too strongly, but I mean, every development has two coins. So in that sense, it's also good news for the top players. And so in that sense, as long as you can take care of cheating that might go on because the machines play so much better, I didn't think it hurt the game.
That's a positive response that humans can learn from machines. But on that note, we are coming to the last segment, and I would like your views or calls or advice to the viewers and listeners of this podcast. What would be, we have different audience. We have current students, former students, executives, policy officials, and other stakeholders. What would be your advice for what is in store for future business and retailing, and what could these stakeholders do to prepare themselves better for the future?
Well, let me start with the undergraduate teaching. Personally, I'm deeply convinced that as a good marketeer, you need to have a good understanding about the data. And sometimes I'm joking with my econ colleagues. They usually think they are better researchers because they have so much data. And then I ask them, okay, you go to the Federal Bureau of Statistics, you get the 20 years of data, and then it might turn out you have monthly data. So that means 20 times 12. So that means 240 observations. And then I tell them about the situations we encounter with millions of consumers making decisions. So I'm deeply
Wonderful.
convinced that in marketing, we have so much more data than in most other disciplines in business and in particular in economics. So the ones who would like to work with data, I think they should actually come to our field. At the same time, I also feel the marketeer of the future needs to have a decent knowledge how to work with data. Because even if you're a very creative person and you might have outstanding creative ideas in terms of how to set up an ad spot or something like that, one day someone will come and show me, okay, you have a number of convincing arguments why this very innovative creative spot might be better, but that, can you also show me with the data? And if you can do that, probably you won't get the money to run the advertising spots. On the other side, if you manage to do so, if you tell the CFO, you give me 10 euros and I give you 25 euros back, I mean, that's a very strong argument to get much more money from for running the marketing campaigns. So that's what I do with the undergraduates. I think for the business, the most important part will be, from my point of view, we will see much more automation going on. We talked about the processes. I think some of the parts of the processes will be automated. From my point of view, we will see a lot of information technology going on there. But if we think about digitization, we essentially think about seamless processes that simply execute fastly. And what we would like to have is, if you have a customer on your website thinking about something, essentially you want to be like Amazon, instantly sending a recommendation about what to do. And obviously, you can't get humans involved to make such a quick decision. So we need to make sure that software helps us to accomplish this vision.
So I think your message is very clear. Be more geared towards data analysis, be more geared towards processing, be more geared to real-time decision, optimization, automation. And I think on that note, I wanted to express my sincere thanks for coming on this show and lighting it up with fabulous insights from you and your research. So vielen Dank, and best wishes for continued success in your current and new future research. And I'm really looking forward to newer insights from your research. Auf Wiedersehen.
Vielen Dank. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.